I would like to thank Professor Heppell for accepting our invitation to participate in this interview, the first one that we are recording within the Global Education Forum. But let me introduce Professor Heppel before we begin our conversation because it is worthy to know with whom we are going to speak today. Professor Stephen Heppel is currently the Felipe Segovia Chair of Educational Innovation at UCJC. But previously, he was professor of the chair in new media environments in the Center for Excellence in Media Practice in Barnemouth University. And he's also emeritus professor in the chair of new learning environments in the Anglia Ruskin University. In 2008, he received the prestigious BED Award for Outstanding Achievement in ICT Teaching. And Professor Heppel is truly one of the pioneers of multimedia education, um, hidden projects such as Apple Computer Renaissance, which initiate the development and use of CD-ROMs in education. Um, so we could say that Stephen was the pioneer and father of early social networking in learning, with seminal projects such as the following. So the pre-internet teletext and email social networking project, the national White Schools Online for the UK Department of Trade and Industry, Tesco SchoolNet, also probably the largest internet learning project in the world, according to the Guinness World Book of Records. Talking Heads, linking all English head teachers in an online community, and so on. So finally, so Professor Stephen Heppel is a world expert in contemporary pedagogies, online teaching, and the design of learning spaces, all key elements in design and university of the future that we are about to discuss. And let me just be clear about the purpose. We will do so today speaking with Professor Heppel. The university of the future will be largely supported by the wide range of technologies. All of them must contribute to some use that seem us to be essential. As we have stated in the manifesto of this conference, technologies should help us to empower each and every one of our students, bringing out the best in each of one of us to help us to investigate, understand, and solve the pressing problems we have to face, to improve our communication and increase our collective intelligence. In short, there is no one better than Stephen Heppel to help us understand how to use technologies for that goal. So thank you very much, Stephen, for the opportunity to give us this interview. And you have a lifetime of professional experience at the intersection of technology and education. You have seen its birth, its evolution, and uh, I will say its heyday. So not so long ago, you were involved in the Education Technology Action Group involving three UK ministries. So, could you describe for us what are the main challenges we will have to face, and what are the conclusions of the working group regarding what the education of the future will look like?
Yes, and thank you for the honour of the interview. Really, it's been a long lifetime in all this. From those very you mentioned those early days of CD-ROMs. You know, one of the very first. But you'll notice the CD-ROM was making tools for multimedia. You know? Through to today, when the technology, the Internet of Things is all around us, it's embedded. Our lives have changed dramatically by it. So it's been about 40-year journey, but the next 10 years looks to me to be the most exciting in all our careers. And what's happened, I think, are three things that we need to respond to. Obviously, a pandemic has woken the world up to new ways of learning online. I think they were there from the last century, actually, but now people are starting to embrace them, and the speed with which teachers have upped their professional skill base has been quite remarkable. But I think if I'm looking at the learning that's gone on during the pandemic, three things emerge. Firstly, the learning seems to be deeper. When I look at children learning, when I look at adults learning, when I look at people's professional development, they've gone deeper with their learning with no limits. They haven't said, well, I should only do this and then this. They've just gone as far as they dare. And it turns out they dare to go a long way. Secondly, they've always done it with others. I think even our families have been rediscovered with our Zoom quizzes over Sunday evenings or whatever, but we're always with others. Learning's been quite a lonely place for a long time. My exam, my work, my essay, my fees. And I think suddenly we see learning as a collaborative thing. And that's a big challenge, I think, for the university of the future. And finally, I think the age of our learners has been quite remarkable. We've seen little preschool children just down here. I live on the coast of England here. We've seen children doing proper marine biology at 4 and 5. And then, we've seen people at the end of their careers in retailing suddenly deciding that, well, retailing shops are probably not long for this world, but they would like to be a programmer. So suddenly we've got people in their 60s and 70s and even 80s learning again. And I guess for us in education, the challenge there is that learning has escaped. So the second big change really is that learning has escaped. All the boxes we put it in, do a degree in 3 years, have a timetable, do it with people of this age, do it in this location. Learning has escaped from all those boxes. And I don't think we know where it's going, but sure as heck it isn't where we thought it was. And probably the last of those three big things, if I look around the world, I see everybody chasing after better learning. They're saying to themselves, in Saudi Arabia, can we be the best learning in the region? In Australia, can we lead our region? In South America, can Peru be in the lead? Everywhere I go, people see themselves as the leaders in a new model of learning. So the race is on. And that's a big challenge, I think, for Europe as well.
So you have mentioned, Stephen, deeper learning communities, meaningful and real learning. So you have always been an advocate of learning by doing, of maker spaces, of learning that requires the development of real projects with an impact on the environment. So how do you translate this slogan to the university of the 21st century?
It's a really interesting question because, in a world where people are doing their degrees online they might be registered in Madrid, but they're living in China for 2 years because of the pandemic. What is special about the place where you might come to learn, or what is special about the learning you do? And of course, what is special is the place itself, the community, the culture, you're not just learning how to do, but you're physically doing it, in the community that you live in, with the tools that are around you, with the expertise of much older people, with the excitement of younger people. The learning is grounded in the place we're at. So although the learning resources might come to us online, there are some wonderful online learning resources, the Khan Academy, free for everyone, forever, for all children, and a lot of stuff out there. But actually, the learning is about communities of people who are based in a place, and that place is becoming more important, not less important. But of course, the place might not be the university campus. It might be the village you live in. It might be the town you're in. It might be the place where you're based. There's a lot of vocabulary in all this. People talk about hybrid learning and blended learning and modalist learning as though they were key terms. But for me, it's just all learning. And we need the terms when our learning does not include an online component, and then it's only special sort of face-to-face world, or when it is only connected learning, and then it doesn't, we have special terms when we take some of the learning away, but learning itself is people, communities, families, time, asynchronous as well as synchronous. It's all the things that we have on the table in front of us. That's learning. And the University of the Future will embrace all of those things But most importantly, if we're doing things, we need to be doing them at a place, and that place really matters. You can't do it all in a virtual cloud. I spent most of my life looking at people learning in clouds. I mean, we were the group that built social media so well that when Facebook were sued for stealing somebody else's idea, they said, no, 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 we've stolen the idea from these people in England, and we had to go along and present our prior art. So we've been doing this a long time. In the end, you need to be somewhere, and that matters.
You have always talked in your writings about these topics that you have been mentioning: equity, the use of time, synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid, collaboration, global projects, the sense of belonging to a learning community, the sense of belonging to the cultural context where you are working, um, and so on. So, but how should we change the design of our curriculum in the university? Because probably we should change many things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a key question, and I think the back of the question is, what are we offering that people couldn't get somewhere else? And I'll be a little controversial here, because I think there are three things we can offer. One is passion and eccentricity. When we surveyed people in the 1990s, said, what was your best learning experience? Because we were designing online learning then. They all said that the best ones were I was learning with others, I was actually doing something. I had a measure of my own progress, that what we call ipsative reference. I felt myself moving forward. But most of all, they reflected that the people who were leading their learning, their parents, their teachers, their coaches, their mentors, were passionate about the learning. They were perhaps even a little crazy. Poetry wasn't just something to learn to them. Poetry was a passion. They cared about glacial scenery. They were obsessed by the joy of number. So I think the first thing we should offer is more passion. And I think historically our universities have moved towards, fairly standardized, here's a lecturer, they have a PhD, they've done this, they've done this. I think we're going to need more eccentricity, which is perhaps back to the history of our institutions. I think the second thing is, we can offer a place where people can be their very best. You mentioned it in your introduction, but if I look at sport, for example, I work with the elite sports in England, the Olympic sports, and you only have to look at the medal table to see that they must be doing something right. Gone from one gold medal in Atlanta to so many gold medals in the last three Olympics. But what happened there was people train and they do their learning about sport wherever they live, but they have to go to a place to be the very best. So our sailors at the peak, all go to Portland on the south coast. Our rowers all go to a particular piece of water that's been built for this, the best possible piece of water to learn to row on. Our cyclists go to a purpose-built velodrome. So I think the university becomes a place which finesses your learning, which is, okay, you've learned a lot, but now let's see what's the best you can possibly be. It's here. And I think if you look at the work we were doing, for example, with the Learning Lab in UCJC, building a space which is physically as good as it can be for your brain, is a very good magnet for people to come to learn. And last of all, of course, the thing has never changed with our universities over the last many hundreds of years. You go to build networks. You build networks of other people. You learn about other people. You maybe even marry other people, but your networks are strong. And I think for our universities to survive, those networks have to be global. So I think the question for us is, how does this place of excellence network onto a community of learners that's global? And one of the ways we're looking at this, Joachim, as you know, is by looking at our alumni. When you leave the university, you haven't left us. You're still in our learning family. We want to know what you're doing in Singapore or Australia or South America. We're interested in you for life. You've committed some time to us. We've committed the rest of your life to ourselves. And I think that networking, becoming global, is a really important. But not, English universities have done a thing of just trying to build another university in China that looks just like the one in London. Now, that's entirely wrong. That's sort of cultural imperialism or whatever. What I'm talking about is, how do we join up with each other? How do we build this family of learners? How do we value the differences in those cultures? Not how do we impose our own cultures on them? It's a rich, joined up world. And those three things: passion and eccentricity, excellence and networking. There's our future right there.
Stephen, you have been a witness and an agent of the evolution of many of the technologies we now use in education. So, which of them were an unfulfilled promise, and which others do you see a promising future for?
Yeah, these are great questions, by the way. And the unfulfilled promise, I think, is an easy one. I mean, the very first time we sat down children in front of, my first computer in the classroom was made of wood. Had to make the box before I soldered the computer. But the first time we put children in front of it, they took risks with their learning. They said, "Oh, I wonder if I change my poem a little bit, or I wonder if I put that number into this column, what would happen to my geometric progression?" They were allowed to take risks with their learning. And I think if you read the literature of this right the way through, people taking risks with their learning in universities and schools everywhere, that was the promise. But I think our education systems haven't been very kind to risks. We're not very good at putting children in an exam room and saying, well, it's a bit risky, but have a go. Our children go into the exam room, our students, and they say, I hope there's no surprises on the exam paper. I hope I'm prepared for everything. They go in trying to have as few risks as possible. And yet all the promise of technology was it allows us to take risks safely and learn more quickly. So the lost promise has been in all the technologies, and just really not being able to fulfill that risk taking that they've offered us. Look, here's an early days little robot that some kids made. That they've got sensors on it, gallops around the floor, and they had no idea what they were building when they built it. But if I look at what children are doing with robots in the classroom now, they've got a kit, they've got a curriculum, they've got worksheets. The risk is all gone. They're just replicating. So that very first thing, very importantly. But I think also perhaps the second thing is, I think there's a sort of gap between technology being invented and everybody said, well, that's got no place in education. There's no place for TikTok in a university degree. And then eventually they say, oh, no, okay, TikTok, very important. We'll have a module on TikTok. So first of all, we deny there's a role for things. And then secondly, we think they're so important, we try to embrace them and control them, put it back in the boxes. And I think in that space between denial and control, that's the subversive space, if you like, and it keeps changing. So, for a while, that subversive space was programming, then it was maybe multimedia, then it was databases. I think databases underpinning a lot of what we did. Then it was the internet, probably now it's data and data visualization. So, education, if we manage to keep in that slightly subversive space when our governments are saying this has nothing to do with education, and before they say this is the most important thing in education, if we can survive in that space in the middle and keep moving, then we're up for some really quite subversive but quite ingenious and creative times. So I think the lesson I've learned from all these technologies, going forward is keep moving, keep moving.
Yes, was one question concerning your answer, Stephen, because of course technology is very important. It's always inspiring, but probably the key point, the most important thing, is the instructional design, the coherence of our learning design. Um, for me, probably is the most important point that we probably, and we tend to forget. So can you tell us something about how should we do it to to give us to give our students a better learning online experience?
Yeah, I mean, we do it by looking at the data, and we do it by looking at, just like any other design, really. If we were designing an electric car after a internal combustion car, we look at what we know and we go forward from there. And what we learned from online learning, I mean, very early on, really, was that if it's all synchronous, it's never going to be inclusive. The opportunity for every child to have device connected for a moment of time, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like, partly because children are in different time zones, or you've got a couple of siblings and you're fighting for who has the device, or you've got two devices but only one lot of bandwidth, or your mum is trying to hold down a job. So when we make it synchronous, we say to a lot of children, this isn't going to work for you, but it's going to work for a few. So we know that those asynchronous things really, really matter. Here's a task we're going to be doing across the week. I'll be here on a Friday afternoon if you want some advice, and on a Monday, there's a chance to show it to each other, a little plenary type activity. But spreading time really, really, really matters. Because as we go global, we have to spread time. Secondly, I think in traditional learning, we put learning in quite distinct chunks. In our curriculum, we have modules, and within the modules, we have subunits, and the subunits are assessed by essays. We know that when people learn online, they go to depth, they do bigger things, they do it with others, and leaving that space is a really necessary thing. How do we quality assure it? Because it's easy these days, because so much of the work is being done digitally. The quality assurance is much easier than it was. I mean, the university essay was invented by Oxford University because they didn't have enough people to do vivas. They didn't have enough people to interview every student. So you write an essay and that will do. And now, of course, every word that's written, every syllable, every moment, every keystroke, we can record all that. And we can analyze it. We can see who's doing what. If I just take a simple circle of a group of learners on a degree doing a course, I can see who's talked to whom, who hasn't talked to anybody yet, is working away just on their own. I can see all that. And I think for sure a big part of our learning design will be our data analytics and the transparency of that. We don't want to do data analytics to say, we've been spying on you. We know you don't work on a Wednesday. What we want to do is to give the analytics to the students so they can make judgments about how good their learning is, and we can look at the aggregates and do a better job of design. So, I think a lot of things we used to do in universities for reasons of quality assurance have sort of gone, because, a simple thing, we ran a project for children who'd been excluded from school for 10 years. We had 3, 4, 5,000 kids a year, huge numbers. And one question was, how do we stop these children being selfish? One of the problems some of them had was that they never thought about others. They had no empathy, And we did a discourse analysis of their of all their written work, and you could see them stopping saying I and me and mine, and 9 months later we and ours and us. You could just see the grammar change, and you could see the learning in the data. So I think the way we look at the data, and you're on top of this is a big part of your understanding. The way we use that data as part of our design is going to be hugely important going forward. But I'd also say, just back to what I said earlier, putting in the surprises, taking out the certainty, that's the hardest job for us, I think. How do we build a curriculum where people, I walk through the door on a Monday and I go, I wasn't expecting that. I walk out into the world, I wasn't expecting COVID. My granddaughters are in the local school. Over this weekend, 7 children in the class and all 3 teachers have gone down with COVID. Well, we weren't expecting that on Thursday. and here we are on Wednesday, and it's full. The world is full of unexpected things. So our degrees have to be full of unexpected things to prepare children for. That's the hardest part of design, because we like to design, with our feet on the ground, but actually the ground's shaking a bit.
And talking about design, Stephen, just another kind of design. One of the disciplines in which you have been probably more active in recent times has been the design of learning spaces. For you, space is a determining factor when thinking about the learning experience. So, what trends do you perceive in the design of spaces for higher education? On how do they combine or complement the virtual learning?
Yeah, again, these are great questions. So there's a lot of science in all this. We know a lot about movement. For example, if I keep my body active, the blood goes through my head. The neurons are working better than they would have been otherwise. More oxygen in your brain, you work better. So, keeping people a little active in the learning space matters. Now, that doesn't mean we've got them all on, have an exercise machine behind me. Doesn't mean they all have to be on an exercise machine, but that doesn't mean they need to get up and move around. We need to have standing surfaces and sitting surfaces. But also, we need to zone the space and have a sense that I'm going to be doing this activity now, and then I'm going to be doing this activity, and then maybe this activity, and I need to move around to do all that. So, we know the science of movement impacts on the quality of cognitive processes, so we need to build some movement in. And our traditional spaces are very passive. Indeed, some of our schools would say to children, sit up straight and don't fidget, which is probably the opposite of what they need to do to have their brains active. And then we know that, just to take another example, we know that if I write on, you can see, I'm pointing the wrong way. You can see on the whiteboard behind me, which is a connected whiteboard. It's a smart cat board. If I write on that board, it's a shared activity. Actually, I share it with others not even here. So when we write publicly and other people can see what we've put, they can say, oh, hang on, Stephen, I think you've got a bit of a misunderstanding there. I look, see that bit. Or they can say, oh, that's really interesting how you've done that. Let me learn from it. When we write publicly, we learn from each other and we support each other. So traditional classroom, we just have a tablet in front of us or a notebook or a workbook. It's a very lonely, very individual place. So building spaces that are collaborative in their nature turns out to be very, very important. And we could go on. I mean, the key thing here is the aggregation of marginal gains. All these tiny details add up. Each one matters. If I have a room with a writable surface, my students will learn from each other better than if it doesn't have that. If I have a room with movement and activity, their brains will be sharper. If I get the ventilation right, the CO2 down, the oxygen up, they'll be a bit more bright-eyed coming up to lunchtime. All those matter, but if I do them all, wow, the difference is huge. And if you want to see what that looks like, again, look at elite sports. There was a time when our elite sports were trained by people out of our services. They say, right, you've got to do 100 press-ups, and do this. And now, the training for sport is a problem-solving process. And by the way, if you were watching the American Open the weekend, you'll have seen an 18-year-old schoolgirl, coming out of pandemic and lockdown to be not just a very good player physically, I mean, the strokes were astonishing, but the resilience she had to change track and she wasn't expecting her opponent to suddenly start hitting the ball harder. She was able to realign herself as a player because of the learning experience that she'd had at only 18. So you can see the impact of all this. We have to build that into our spaces. But of course, the same applies to the online spaces. If they're not collaborative, they're not a little surprising. If they're not where your brain will be at its best, and your brain won't be at its best by sitting watching you and I chatting away like this, that it'll need more. That's why it's a short conversation. But we know how to do this. The aggregation of marginal gains means doing it well. The result is astonishing, literally astonishing. And I constantly go, oh, well, I wasn't expecting that, So I get surprised every day by the impact of surprise.
So, Professor Heppell, let me ask you just one last question. So, as a responsible for the Felipe Segovia Chair of Educational Innovation at the UCJC, what do you think have been the main innovations of our institution in recent years in terms of educational technology? And probably what would you recommend we should explore?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's worth saying something about Felipe Segovia because he was a very brave man and he did some extraordinary things. Some of the schools he was building in the 1970s, flew in the face of what the government wanted to build. And he went ahead and did it because he knew it was right. And I think as an institution, we hold on to that very well. I'm proud to wear this shirt because as an institution, we get on and do what we know is right. And we know that others follow in our footsteps. When we built the learning lab, you'll remember because your office is up there, that by about day 3, we had people from other universities walking through, taking photographs. And best of all, I thought we had a lot of our colleagues walking through, showing their family what had happened. So, look at this interesting space, So, following in Felipe Segovia's footsteps means being brave, doing what we know to be right, and not waiting for the others to get on the train, just going straight ahead. And I think we've been very good at, you've been particularly good at, we've been very good at embracing new technologies. I mean, if I go back to the 1980s, you would walk into an educational space and you go, wow, I've never seen one of them before, and it might have been a computer or a way of linking your computer to a screen, a barcode projector or whatever. We kind of lost the wow factor. And I think walking around the space where you and I are on the campus, wow, look at that 3D microphone, or wow, look at that. We've been brave enough to look at the wow and to bring it back into our learning. That really matters. So I think we need to keep the child in us, and be brave and say, oh, I want to try one of those. Let's have a go. Fareed is very good at that, saying, oh, that's a great idea. Let's try it, even if it's wrong. I think we need to keep that childlike innocence of trying out the new things and then really being very, very sensible about the things which clearly work. Where we invest our money is in the things that clearly work. We were very early into good online environments, and we should need to stay there. I think, as our students become, they carry the sensors on their wrists, and they'll be, the technology around them will be embedded in them, and they will be around the world, not just on campus. I think that can only happen with technology, and it can only happen with new technologies. And the best way we get to find out how good those are is to ask the students and the youngsters, hey, what do you think you might do with this? Here's a device that whatever. I just remember when Google brought out their kind of Google Glass, where I could, everywhere I went, I was streaming video and could show everybody what I was doing. It didn't work very well in America because people just thought it was a camera and they were terrified of, this man filming me. But you watch, there'll be lots of smart glasses appearing over the next 18 months. How we embrace those in building our world community of learners will be an interesting challenge and a lot of fun, I wear these, by the way, when I'm sailing the boat still at night, because I look up and every star in the sky is labeled. I know what every constellation is. And so as I'm sailing the boat, I'm learning in a lovely sort of way. So, never stopping learning, which I think you and I have been advocates of from the start, really. I can't think of a conversation we've had when we haven't been learning something, today included.
So thanks very much, Professor Heppell. It was a pleasure to speak with you. It was an honor. Thanks very much for the great ideas. And we will have the opportunity to discuss further all of them in the Global Education Forum. Thanks very much.
My pleasure, genuinely my pleasure.